Hello YouTubers, in this video we're going to be changing out the springs in my 2009 Saab 9.3 cross-wheel drive XWD. As you know, when I first bought this car, one of the first projects I did was to bring it back up to stock height with the stock springs that the previous owner provided. He had put in Megan racing springs and the car beat the hell out of itself driving down the road. In this video, we're going to learn more about the Saab spring options and what we're going to do to bring it back down to a normal, better looking height than what that is. What we're trying to accomplish is to lower the car to a Turbo X type of height, if you will. I'm not sure if any of you noticed that when you look at Saabs online, you see some that look jacked up, kind of like this one does to me. And you see some that look lowered. And no indication that it was lowered via a non-factory way. It just looks like it came lowered. In reality, it did. Saab offered 3 different spring choices for these cars and associated struts and shocks. Now, here's what I do know. Of the 3, it is base, sport tuned, and sport tuned lowered. Those were your 3 choices. This car here is sport tuned. And I mentioned this in my previous video. This is a sport tuned suspension. What I have done is I have bought the sport tuned lowered springs to bring it back down to the optional height that you could have got on this car from the factory. And that's the goal for the video. I want to bring this down just a little bit. I'm not trying to reinvent the car. I don't care for it to be lowered. I already had lowering springs on it. They weren't right, but it was already lowered. And so I just want to make it factory. How did it come into factory? I wanted to ride like the factory Saab. I'm not looking to go take this to a track, and I don't want racing springs. Seems like everyone you look at online say racing springs. Got no interest in racing this car. I just want it to ride like it does, sport tuned, but lowered. So before we get too much further into this, I want to take a moment and cover what you're looking at here. And it's on the side of every Saab. Just open the driver door and you will see a sticker along the side that shows you several things. What you're looking at here, we're going to start with the FB, X5, X5. Those are suspension codes that are assigned to the car when the car was made. For this car, it said X5 is sport tuned lowered front suspension, the first X5, and the second X5 is sport tuned lowered rear suspension. Now that's not what came on this car. I have proof that that's not here, and I'm gonna pop it up on the screen. If you take a look at this part number here and you were to cross-reference the rear spring, you will find that that is a sport chassis spring. So while the suspension code on the sticker says one thing, what was installed on the car is another thing. So the next thing we have to do is go to the build sheet for the car. So let's take a look at that. So here's the build sheet that I got off of esaab.com. And what we're looking at here is my car. It's 4 doors, left-hand drive. And we're scrolling down until we get to the part where it says Sport Chassis Normal Height. That is what came on the car. That coincides with what we see as far as the springs installed on the car. So where am I going with all of this? You want to make sure you do your due diligence before you just go buying parts for your car if you're trying to make it like a factory setup, which is what my goal was, factory lowered suspension. And I had to rely on something. So I had to figure out what is the correct information about my car. And it ended up being that the build sheet is the correct information on my car. So with that information, I went and bought the correct parts that I felt I needed to bring this car back down to the sport tuned lowered suspension that the sales brochure said the car came with. But with evidence we've seen and according to the build sheet, that is not the case. So let me show you what I bought to the goal. I bought these springs, which I'm not gonna say they're the last set in America, but they might be. I had a tough time finding them, and this was the last two. These are not the original equipment ones. This is the people who made the spring after Saab went out of business. They made these springs for a period of time. The part number is 3202-2111. If you look that up, you will find that this is a sport-tuned lowered coil spring for the cross-wheel drive, which is what this is. Here are factory original sport-tuned lowered springs, but for the manual transmission car. Cannot find sport-tuned lowered in the automatic in America. Anywhere. I was willing to go anywhere. These are made in Germany. These are not. These are factory. So anyway, my goal is to install these. So why these? Why the manuals? It's the closest I can get. The manual transmission car is just a little bit lighter than the automatic car, and which should make it just a little bit lower. I bought these from Saab Parts, and they said that if anything, it might make it 1 millimeter or 2 lower than the automatic car. And these are for the cross-wheel drive, specific to the cross-wheel drives. And then I went ahead and bought new from Saab. They don't look new. They sat on some part shelf for a long time. Upper and lower coil spring seats. Those are uppers. This is the lower, and this is the front dust cover that if you saw my first video undoing what the previous owner had done, I had to reuse these guys. So I have since bought new ones, Saab OEM. And the part number for these are 1278-0358. That's the manual transmission number. 0359 is the automatic number, and they're unobtainium. So this is what we got. This is what we're going to install. One thing to note, sidetrack. When I put in the new springs, I do not have an expectation that it's going to look lowered. Believe it or not. They've not had any stuff ever installed on them, so they're higher than what these are. I would imagine if I brought these out of underneath the car, these could be lower because these have had a car sitting on them for 15 years, 16 years. These have had nothing ever on them. So the springs could be higher, and so the car may still be higher, but after it rides around for a month or two, it may settle and get lower. That's when I expect it to be lowered, not right off the bat. Okay, so the first thing I want to know before I start the project is where is the car at in space, the body line to the ground. So let's get measurements on the front and back, and we'll find out our starting point. Okay, for the front, we appear to be 26 7/8. For the rear, we appear to be 26 3/4, 7/8, somewhere in there. First thing I want to do is pull these caps here off. And I'm going to loosen this bolt just a little bit, just so that I can break. So I'm not breaking it loose on my vise. I'm breaking it loose while the car is settled. So I bought this kit here off Amazon since the last time we did the struts. And just to make my life simpler for down the road, next time I ever have to do this job. Just like the last time, this takes a 21 millimeter, I believe. And it does, excuse me, and it does. And I think this was an H7. There we go. So it's gonna go like that. I'm gonna hold this with this hand and hold the camera just to show you I've already loosened it. So the bolt is loose, or excuse me, the nut is loose. And now let's take this out and go do the other one. Again, I'm just going to loosen with this while holding this in place. Okay, the next thing I want to do is undo this clip here, take this out, and I'm going to take this clip here out. I undid the clip here, it's just a push-pull. Now I want to get this clip out of this bracket here because this bracket needs to come off when I pull this out. Okay, the next thing after we got these loose is we're going to undo the upper sway bar bolt. We don't need to take out the lower sway bar end link, just this one that's connected to the strut. These are 18s. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to leave that there. When we relieve tension on this, that will relieve the tension on that. So that stays. Now, let's take our 18s, because these are both 18s. Oh, excuse me, 18 on this side, 15 on that side. Okay, the nuts are off, and what I've done is put my jack right here, just to relieve some of the pressure from here to here, excuse me, from here to here, just relieving some of the pressure. And now I'm gonna work to back that bolt out and that bolt. So I wonder if a screwdriver will. There we go. Top one out. Let me do the same to the bottom. Okay, so this knuckle is, or spindle is loose from the strut. Let's see. Sway bar end link is out. Now, the only thing holding us in are the top bolts, and those are 13 millimeter. So now there's nothing holding us on except these bolts here. I'm going to be unloosening those while holding the underside, and then I'm just going to carry the unit out. So this hand will be on here. This hand will be loosening the bolts, and I'll grab the unit out. Okay, the spring or strut is in my vise, or actually just laying on it. Anyway, my spring compressor tool is on. I've got them seated comfortably. And now all I'm going to do is tighten it down, tighten the bolt. It's going to tighten the spring and allow me to undo this top bolt, which is what I loosened earlier, that bolt there, and allow me to lift this off. So it's nothing more to it than, in fact, I'll just show you. Tightening the bolt, and it's tightening the spring. I'm going to be doing it, making it even. So I'm going to be going from side to side. Then I'm going to grab that top bolt out. Okay, I think we're coming down with it. I think we're in a good spot. You can see here, this looks a little loose. So I'm going to now loosen the top bolt here with my tool that we had earlier, same setup, 21 on the outside, H7 on the inside, and let's get that bolt out. So I just want to show you this, see how the top mount is moving. That means that we do have the spring compressed correctly, and we can now remove our bolt because there's no pressure on this. Okay, the bolt is out. Lift off the strut mount. We can lift off our bearing. Goes like that. So let me transfer everything and we'll be back. One thing to note, now that everything is loose, is how it orients itself. It wants to sit in this section here. The top one will not want to sit in there, so it can only go one way. So let's take our old parts off of this one. Bump stop can stay, and let's get this rubber isolator off. Okay, here's a non-scientific way of looking at it. The right is the new one from Saab parts with a manual transmission, sport tune lowered, and the left is my car. I have them sitting at the same angle. So it's a little bit lower, But that one's a little bit lower, but that one has 100,000 miles of weight sitting on it. This one's had 0. So I'm gonna put the strut or the spring on wrong, just so you can see that it can only go one way. So if you look there, it's seated where it wants to be. But if you look back here, it doesn't fit into the housing, into the seat area. So I've already put my rubber isolator on. Let's put this side down. And it sits in its housing like it wants to be there. So if it doesn't want to be there, it doesn't want to be there. So, all right, now I'm going to put my boot, my new boot, over top. So the strut is back on, top bolt is back together. Now I just need to loosen this. And putting that bolt on is no more than getting the spring compressed to a point where the bolt and the housing will go on comfortably, which is what this is. And then put the bolt on and with your tool, tighten it down, which is what I've already done. So last thing for me to do is to pull the spring compressor out and put the strut back in the car. All I'm going to do is shove it back in that hole up here and start some bolts. So if I can find the torque specs, I'm gonna come back and do it, but otherwise I think it's just good and tight. So the only thing these are doing is just holding the strut from rotating and holding it in place, of course, but the majority of the work is being done down there. So if the strut doesn't line up, like when you first put it in, it's not uncommon, it just twists. So just twist it into position. And we should be able to put that in there and put our bolts back in. Okay, all the bolts are started. Now let's put our nuts on and I'll pop the torque spec up on the screen after I Google it. Okay, all the connections are back on. Sway bar in link. These. Time to drop the car down. Okay, she's down, ready to go. Everything buttoned up. So let's take a measurement. So the new measurement is 27.5 inches. So that means the car has gone up with the new springs, which is not uncommon. The car is going to have to ride, bounce, move around. So that's exactly what I was expecting, like I said at the beginning of the video. So that's what we got. Now on to the other side. So the car is on jack stands in the back. We're ready to proceed. We're going to be replacing this upper strut mount or rubber mount, whatever, and that lower one that's barely hanging on. So that's going to be replaced as part of that. Let's get this spring out. The first thing we want to do is undo our E18 Torx, and on the other side is a 18 millimeter. So let's get this bolt out. Okay, so all I have is took that bolt out. I wedged a screwdriver right here and just pulled it down to break it free from here. Next thing we want to do is push this thing on down and let's get that spring out. First, let's grab that out because we're going to be putting in another one. Let's get our spring out of here. And we want the bottom piece that's wore the hell out. Okay, here are the rear springs. The left is the one that came out of the car, and the right is the one that's going back in. I have them facing the same way so that we're looking at apples to apples. So before we put in the new one, let's put in our new rubber isolators. All right. Anyway, let me get this situated. I'm just going to put it down in there, make sure everything's nice and pretty, and then I'm gonna push it up in here. So it seems I forgot to record the last part. My apologies. All I did was fit the spring up into the top half that you see there, and then began lifting up on the control arm on the bottom until I could get the hole lined up for the screw, or excuse me, the bolt. Once I got the bolt in there, just tighten it down to 54 foot-pounds, and that's the end of the process. Nothing more to it than that. Okay, the rear now appears to be 26 3/8. So it looks like it's dropped it a half an inch-ish, just right off the bat. So I still think there's more to come once we get it out on the road. So let's button everything up. So here we are riding around in it. Just got done with it. And I wanted to put some miles on it real quick just to let things settle, because we did change the bushing on the front strut, the rubber boot, which is also part of a bushing there, rubber bushing. And we changed the 2 bushings in the back. I just want to make sure everything seats properly. Put some miles on it. I will say, I was quasi-expecting it to be clanging and banging like when I first bought the car, when it had Megan racing springs on it. That is not the case. The suspension is just as it was before. Quite happy with it. So, yeah, let's get some miles and some weight on it. Get some wind pushing it down on the ground. Get with it. Okay, YouTubers, that was it. These pictures here are from probably a month later. Anyway, car is settling down. It's lowering itself millimeter by millimeter. Anyway, YouTubers, if you like the video, like the video.